Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is another lesson on international business law and conflict of laws from a German point of view. Today, I would like to talk to you about a specific area of international business law, and we are going to be focusing on a very specific area on the one hand. On the other hand, the applicability of which is pretty big in real life. Even though more and more business is made and money is made with services, still we need the goods. So we need cars, we need computers, we need food, we need chairs, we need a toothbrush and stuff like that. So still international sale of goods, and I'm talking about physical goods you can actually touch and use, still is a broad range of business and economy in today's modern and global world. And as long as everything's going fine, everybody's happy. We just buy the things and we pay the money, that's great. But in a lot of cases we realize the chair is not the style I actually wanted it to, the food doesn't taste well, or it's even not to be sold in a specific country due to the regulations over there and the quality of the food. So we will have to look at that a little more closely. To make things a little easier for us, I have a little exercise case for you, and usually vice versa. In that case, it's like that we have a buyer, a person situated in the United Kingdom, and very funny, I call them United Buyers, okay? And we have a seller in the United States, and the buyer in the United Kingdom wants to buy 10,000 gallons of whiskey with an alcohol content of 47% of alcohol. The price they agree upon is, you can see that down there, $20 per gallon. So that makes roughly $200,000. The whiskey, the gallons are delivered, and the buyer immediately realizes, oops, that doesn't have an alcohol content of 47%, but that only has an alcohol content of 40%, which is a lot less than I actually bought, and it's a lot less than I am willing to pay. So the buyer is still thinking for a short while and then decides, okay, I'm going to buy all of that and use it and sell it for a special price somewhere. Now my printer is switching on. Hopefully you don't hear the noise too much. And he says, I'm going to sell it for a lower price, but I want a reduction of price from myself. Now, let's again imagine that a German court would be deciding the case. We always need that, so we have some kind of point to addict to or to cling on to and start the whole procedures. The first question always will be, which laws are going to be applied in that case, because we have two different countries. Actually, we have two different continents, and one of these continents is the United States, America, and the other one is Europe. So let's start the whole thing, and maybe you have seen one of the other lessons and you already know about the methodology of conflict of laws, because the first step we have to go through is, does that case have an international aspect? And if so, the judge and the courts in that country need some kind of advice, what to do in these cases. And in Germany, this role is being played by Article 3 of our Introductory Act to the German Civil Law Code, which is called Article 3 of the EGBGB. This funny abbreviation back there is because of the German language, because it says Einführungsgesetz zum bürgerlichen Gesetzbuch. After that, once we know what to do and whether we are allowed to apply a foreign law or not, we have to qualify the claim and figure out which claims are going to be decided by which law system worldwide. Once that is done and we have some kind of a result, we have to watch for a renvoi. If somebody is still wondering, what's that and what does that mean, you can look at the video about the methodology of conflict of laws, and you hopefully will find the link below our little video over here. The last question will be, if I apply these foreign law systems, if I apply these foreign rules, is that in order with is that compliant with our own basic fundamental ideas of what's correct or not. We call that the ordre public or public order. It's the same thing. Watch the methodology and you'll know why all of these are French words more or less, okay? Now let's have a look at the first part, and that is, what does the German court have to do if there is an international case and there is our Article 3 of the Introductory Act to the German Civil Law Code. And we have three possibilities. Actually, it's more or less four. We have the European regulations, we have international conventions, and we have at least for business law, a tiny little part left over in the German Introductory Act to the German Civil Law Code, which is in German called Internationales Privatrecht, private international law. I do prefer the expression conflict of laws because it's not a really international law. It's a national one telling us if 2, 3, 4 law systems are conflicting, all of them could be applied somehow. Which one of those are we going to be using? Okay? So we have that. Now we know it's an international aspect and we will have to figure out, and we'll do that via a qualification of the claim. Now what is the qualification of claim? We learned in the lessons before that in civil law cases, it's all about claims. Can somebody demand something from another person? Is that right or not? And do we get a judgment according to what we actually wish and what our interests are, yes or no? To give that a structure, we have different types of claims. We have contractual claims, claims based on rights in rem, that's property and things like that. And we have the statutory claims such as agency of necessity, law of torts, and unjust enrichment. When we look on our case with whiskey, it actually looks like a sales contract. So we will have to look for contractual claims. And for the contractual claims, our Article 3 of the Introductory Act to the German Civil Law Code says, well, we have two possibilities. You either can look in Rome 1 or at Rome 2, or the CISG if there is a sales contract. The CISG is by far not the only international convention which is dealing with contractual claims. We have some of these international conventions, for example, for transportation business and stuff like that. But for us today, we'll choose between the two. And since it says Convention on International Sale of Goods, well, that seems to be the most specific one. And you know the ranking. The globally international laws will be applied before the regional international laws, such as Rome 1 being a European regulation only. And those together will be applied before the national laws, the German Introductory Act to the Civil Law Code. Okay? Now let's have a look at the CISG. And the good thing about the CISG, and some lawyers, especially the elder ones such as me, we call that a more modern law because it's less than 100 years old. Well, okay, whatever you think about that. But the good thing about that is they have a very clear structure. And the first part of these more modern laws will be, is it applicable? And these international conventions, they tell you themselves whether they want to be applied or not. And so the first idea might be, now, who the hell is in the CISG? Who's represented over there? And then we have a list. I just printed out that brand new list for you a couple of hours ago. And there we have the list of all the parties represented over there. We have the United States, it's one of the parties over here. And then we look. And what we do see is the United Kingdom, no matter what we look for it, for Great Britain or United Kingdom or whatever you can think of, it's not that. So basically we cannot apply Article 1 of the CISG letter A because that refers to the fact that the parties, the buyer and the seller, are situated in contracting states. But over here it's not like that because Great Britain is not a part of the Convention on International Sale of Goods. why ever. You can find a lot of literature about that on the internet, and if you want to have fun, and maybe some of these contributions are kind of, let's say, strange. And they tell you why they didn't do that. But the fact is, for us, for our case, they're not part of that. So there's a second chance for us. And the second chance is Article 1, letter B of the CISG. And in there it says, the CISG can also be applied when the rules of conflict of laws, the national rules of conflict of laws, lead to the application of the CISG. Okay, so we might find out about that. Now, what does that mean for Germany? What are the national rules of conflict of laws? And since Germany is a member state of the European Union, for us, these national laws are actually already international laws, because all the European regulations are directly applicable on our German territory, okay? So they're very equivalent. They're actually, from the methodology, they're the same as a German law, as is the CISG. But in that case, the CISG, we already found out, is not applicable directly. So now we have to look for the national rules of conflict of laws, the national, international, private law system. And so Rome 1, that's the one we will have to apply. And the general rule we find over there is Article 3, Paragraph 1. Now, I would advise you to stop the presentation, stop the video over here and read it. Please really read it closely, because when we do international law, when we do law from a German point of view, we stick to the words and the grammar of the articles of the law sources very, very closely. So if you want to have a discussion, you first have to know what the words are. Okay, and it says choice of law. So for our case, it means the parties can choose which laws should be applied. Now, I gave you a very brief summary of that little case study at the beginning. And but you didn't get any information that the parties thought about choosing a law system which would be nice for them and would be convenient for them. So in these cases, when parties do not agree, either they forgot about it or they didn't want to agree upon that, we need some kind of substitute regulation, okay? And if the parties do not choose a specific regulation, a specific law system, an international one, or whatever they want to have, then Article 4 of Rome 1 says we will find something for the parties, okay? And when we look at Article 4 of Rome 1, in the first paragraph, in letter A, it says for sales contracts, we will apply the laws of the country in which the seller has his residence. That's pretty cool, and that's any kind of logic, because the seller will always follow his own laws and regulations, whatever they have at home, and he, in a lot of cases, does not know what the legal prerequisites in other countries are. So if you want to have a fair choice, and the law does that for you, would say, okay, let's look for the seller, and if the buyer has some kind of special wishes or prerequisites, he has to tell the seller about that, because it's different than in your place. I need this and that, and everybody having ever done business in Germany knows that we have very specific and very consumer orientated, for the first point, regulations over here, so that might be tricky for the seller to fulfill our requirements, our standards in the European Union, especially Germany. Good. So the seller's residence is in the United States of America. Aha, we got that, the message. Now let's have again a look at the contracting states. Woo, here we go. And there are the United States. Okay. So we can come back to Rome 1 regulation and say the United States, they are a CISG contracting state, and we go back to the CISG, Article 1, first paragraph, letter B, it says, if the rules of conflict of laws, the national rules of conflict of laws, lead to the application of a country which has ratified the CISG, then the CISG will be applicable. And this is the case over here. So yes, we can apply the CISG even though Great Britain is not a part of the CISG, is not a member of the CISG. I would advise you to always check, did the parties exclude the application of the CISG? A lot of companies, to be honest, I don't really know why, but a lot of companies don't like the CISG very much. That is not very reasonable, especially if you're the seller, because the CISG, compared to the German law system, is a lot more seller-friendly, whereas other law systems are a little more buyer-friendly. So basically for the seller, it's a nice idea to have the CISG. If the parties want to exclude the CISG, they have to do that explicitly, okay? And I want to emphasize that word down there, explicitly. Because if you say, well, we don't like the CISG, we want the German laws, that would be a bad idea to write that into one of your contracts. Because if you say, I'll apply the German laws, you have to keep in mind the German laws include, because we have ratified the Convention on International Sale of Goods, the German laws include the CISG. So if you really want to exclude the CISG and apply the laws of France or Switzerland or Germany, you would have to write a clause in the way of writing down, we want, in case of any type of a lawsuit arising around our contract, we want the German laws excluding the CISG to be applied. Okay, you have to say that explicitly. Otherwise, if you choose the law system of a country which is a member state of the CISG, you again get the CISG you actually want to escape. Okay, there are hundreds of decisions like that. Parties again and again make that mistake. I don't know why, because it's very easy. You can see that in any database, you can hear that in any of these lessons as you are just listening to one of those, and everybody will tell you the same thing. Good. Now we know what to apply. This case will be ruled by the CISG. If you need a little break, you do that now. You stop the video for a while, get yourself a cup of coffee or a glass of water or a cup of tea, and when you feel ready for the second part, now we're actually waiting for the answer. Does the buyer get the 10% reduction of the price, yes or no? Then we go on. Okay? You're back? Okay, that's the case structure. You already saw that. And now the question is, does the seller have to reduce the price by 10% and then pay back the overpaid money in case it was already paid? Or if they didn't pay, the buyer, does the buyer simply have to transfer a lower price? And that is the very normal, I would already say, kind of boring sequence method we are applying on material law. This is, the buyer will have the right to reduce the price if the buyer has a claim thereon. Okay, so we first have to find out who wants what from whom, because if we ask who wants something, we have to look for the claims of that person or another person. From whom is that claim really directed? Is that focusing on the person we want something from? And what does he want? Is it damages? Is it delivery? Or in our case, a reduction of the price. The buyer will get that reduction of price if he has a claim thereon. Okay, let's go back to the other slide once more. Once we have the claim, then we check the prerequisites. Okay, so let's go on. And again, that's pretty easy with the CISG because the whole CISG just has a hundred, roughly 100 articles, compared to the German civil law book, which roughly has 2,400 articles. That's actually nothing. And there are very few claims in there. And when you look at the claims, we can firstly separate between buyer's claims and seller's claims. Since the seller doesn't want anything today, in our case, so we can stick to the first three groups, the possession and property. That's not the question because the buyer already got the whiskey, and that is the reason why he's so upset. He says, yes, I got the whiskey, I got the possession and the property, but it's bad. It's not the quality I actually wanted. So in that case, we have to move from the so-called primary claim, property, to the secondary claim, which is, what do I get if something goes wrong? If my interests are not fulfilled? If the goods are not the quality which was described in the contract, for example. And there we have a group of these claims for the buyer, and that is 7 articles actually. It's not that much. And I don't want to say desperately, but I would advise you to read these 7 articles, okay? I know it's a page, but a lot of people don't like reading anymore. But if you want to do laws, especially from a German point of view, you better read it, okay? You concentrate on those. I'll give you some time. You can stop the video and read these articles, and maybe you see which claim could be applicable in our case today, in the whiskey case with the 2 parties from the United States and the United Kingdom. So switch off or stop it, read first, and then return back. Hopefully you had sufficient time to read it, you stopped it, and now let's see what's going on now. So who wants what from whom? That's the question, and we know. B wants a reduction of the price by 10%, okay, from the seller. The claim could be a contractual claim, a secondary claim. And if you really stopped the video and read the articles, you might have found Article 50 of the CISG, okay? And the prerequisites for that claim we have to check now, okay? Now this is Article 50, the way it looks like when you look it up, okay? I skipped the last part of that because it's not relevant for our lesson today, so it's just we can concentrate on that. If the goods do not conform with the contract and whether or not the price already has been paid, the buyer may reduce the price in the same proportion as the value that the goods actually delivered had at the time of the delivery bears to the value that conforming goods would have had at that time. Okay? So it's pretty easy. Now let's just assume that the value of the whiskey, if it's 7% less of alcohol, that this would reduce roughly the value of up to 10%. In a court trial, if the companies or the parties get in a fight and a quarrel about which percentage is correct, we would have to ask an expert. And the expert, that could be a person knowing the markets for spirits on an international base very well. That could be a person actually distilling whiskey or whatever, and they would have to say, is that 10%? Is that correct? What the buyer wants over there or not. So for us, we'll just stay with the question, does the buyer basically have a claim on a reduction of price? Let's look at it in the way, what are the prerequisites for that? And we can see we need a contract, we need goods which do not conform that contract, the contractual obligations of the seller, And then there is a deal with the time we have to look at. Now, that is the logical sequence in which we have to test that. If we don't have a contract, we do not have to check whether the goods are conforming or not conforming the contract, because without a contract you cannot conform or not conform the contract. That's very easy, okay? Then, second and third, I'll tell you in a couple of minutes why it's 2 and 3. These goods do not have to conform with the contractual obligations. And then we have 2 more aspects. Normally at the time when you should have gotten your goods, at that time the goods didn't have that. And there is another time aspect in that, chronological aspect in that we're going to be looking at now. So let's move on. So we know that the buyer might get a reduction of price because there's an article like that for non-conforming goods in Article 50. And the good news now is for warranty cases, we have a very clear structure of these warranty cases. Okay? So if we want to check whether somebody has one of these secondary claims, let it be on reduction of price, let it be avoidance of a contract, let it be substitute delivery, let it be repair or whatever, it's always going to be following the same prerequisites, the first of which is we need a sales contract. Definitely. The moment we know that there is a valid sales contract, we have to check whether that sales contract, more precisely, the obligations from that, arising from that sales contract, have been broken as a bad quality, for example. And some of these secondary claims, they actually need a fundamental breach of contract, okay? So there are basically 2. The one is if somebody is wanting a substitute delivery. Now you could stop at that stage after I told you which articles to look at and read these 2, and you will find the word fundamental breach of contract in there. That is Article 46, second paragraph, that is about the claim on substitute delivery. And that is Article 49, first paragraph, that is about the claim on avoidance of the contract. In these cases, the breach of contract has to be fundamental because this is very, very, very hard for the seller. In both cases, it means you don't get your money, and once substitute delivery, you have to deliver a second time. And in case of avoidance, you have extra costs and bringing your product back because the buyer doesn't want it anymore. So that is only expenses for you, very bad. And if that happens too often, we could, on a legal way, create a lot of insolvencies. That is hidden in there. The lack of quality, the breach of contract, has to exist at the time when the risk passes to the buyer. After that, it's the buyer's responsibility that the goods are in a good shape or not, because now he's in his hands, more or less. And the last one, and we're going to be going through that checklist now one by one, and the last 2 are, and that is for commercial sales contracts only. The last 2 are that in a commercial sales contract, the buyer, as soon as possible, has to examine the goods and figure out, is that what I wanted? And secondly, if the buyer finds out, oh, it's not what I actually wanted, then he or she has to give notice to the seller. These things are not correct from my point of view. So the seller immediately knows what's going on and whether or not there is going to be complications and what he might do to solve the complications. So let's have a look at that. And now we go through the prerequisites, okay? The first is we need a sales contract, and wherever you had a look at legal cases, civil law cases, it's always the same. the prerequisite for a contract are two declarations of intention, an offer and an acceptance. The offer may not only be an invitation to offer or my special thing, the Latin expression for that, no invitatio ad offerendum, same thing as invitation to offer. You have two parts in any declaration of intention. One is objective, you've got to see something, you've got to have a document, at least a sign with a hand, or a verb. That can be orally. Normally, in a lot of cases, you don't need some kind of special form for a contract. And subjective one, somebody has to react and do what he does, give a declaration of intention consciously. So if you fall asleep during a long auction and your head moves forward and you're nodding, you're not consciously acting, okay? That's not a declaration of intention. And you've got to be aware of the fact that this, what you do now, has a legal consequence, okay? For our case, there's not a lot of problem with that because I simply told you they agree upon. So the contract was made because we were focusing on the methodology of warranty claims according to the CISG today. In real life, this is where you work, and when you really do the cases, please check that diligently. Do we really have a contract? It is very, very shaming, and it is very, very expensive if the court tells you nice claim you're actually waiting for and asking for, but unfortunately we don't see a contract over here. So check that. Do we have the documentations? Do we have witnesses and stuff like that? Good. Once you got that done and you figured out that you have a valid sales contract, you can only ask for a secondary claim, being the buyer. You can only ask for the secondary claim if there is a breach of contract. Now, what is a breach of contract is described in Article 35 of the CISG with the obligations for the seller. Okay, what does the seller exactly have to deliver? And the general rule is, surprise, surprise, actually it's no surprise at all, he has to deliver goods which conform the contract. And now I would again ask you, stop the video, read Article 35, read all the paragraphs of Article 35, because the first one, that's the general rule only, and in the general rule it says that the goods have to conform the contract, and then you have examples. What is a contractual quality of the good and stuff like that, and that is in Article 35, second paragraph. And what in real life happens a lot, you have sample models sent before and things like that. Read all of that so you have an idea what the case and the regulation, the article is talking about. And hopefully you read the two articles, Articles 46, second paragraph, and 49, first one. Only if the law explicitly asks for a fundamental breach of contract, you will have to check whether the lack of quality of the product delivered is fundamentally depriving the buyer of what he expected to do. Okay? In our case, we don't need that, because when we talk about a reduction of price, when we talk about the claim of the buyer following Article 50 of the CISG, we don't have that. Article 50 doesn't talk about a fundamental breach of contract. It's just talking about a breach of contract. So that's pretty easy. We got to figure that out. And I think you have no doubt, and you already realized, that the price of alcoholic drinks rises dramatically by the alcohol content they have. Okay? The spirits, everything which was distilled, are a lot more expensive, normally at least, than wine or good beer or something like that. Yes, I know that there are very expensive wines and very cheap spirits, but if you look at the international scene over there, most countries do have a high taxation on alcoholic drinks, and the taxation will be a lot higher if it is a spirit, more than 30-40% of alcohol, than it is for wine or beer, which has a lower alcohol content, a little above or a little below 10%, okay? So obviously we have a breach of contract over here. We don't need the fundamental one in our small case. Maybe I have another case for you already a little later, and then we can talk about fundamental. That breach of contract, that lack of quality has to exist at the time the risk for the existence and the quality of the good passes to the buyer. So it has to be in the area of responsibility of the seller still when that lack of quality occurs. And if the whiskey now just has 40% instead of 47%, it was like that all the time. So it wasn't by handing over the whiskey to the buyer that suddenly 7% of the alcohol content disappeared. Now, what is that time the risk was passing? And we have a couple of regulations in the CISG. And again, please stop the video, read the Article 66, 67, 68, and so on to figure out what is they actually talking about. And then you will come to Article 69. Normally, if no special agreement is made, the risk goes over to the buyer, passes to the buyer in the moment the buyer gets the possession of the good. That's pretty normal and that's pretty logical, because from now on, if you drop the bottles or if you crash the car or whatever, it's your fault and not the seller's anymore. So that is a pretty good one. In international trade, we have a lot of regulations and content about passing on the risk in the Incoterms. And you definitely have heard about these funny names they have before. They're called CIF. It's cost insurance freight, or they are called FAS, free alongside ship, or FOB, which is free on board. And there is a real commentary on these Incoterms, and there you can buy them at the International Chamber of Commerce in Paris. And exactly if you use that term, there is a definition of when the risk passes to the buyer, when it has to be paid and all of that. So they're pretty good because they're formula and it's easy to use them. And that's the best. They're an international standard for that. We don't need them. In our case over here, we have Article 69, that's pretty nice. And we do know that the alcohol content was too low from the beginning on because the 7% didn't disappear during the transportation or something like that. And here we are with the points 4 and 5, more or less, in international sales contracts on a commercial basis, not for the private people. But on a commercial base, the buyer has to examine the goods in a time as short as possible, Article 38. And if he finds out it's a bad quality, he has to give notice to the seller about that fact and the disagreement, and that got to be as soon as possible as well. A lot of articles today in our presentation, in our lesson today. And again, stop the video and read that. Okay, because the consequence of these two articles, Article 39, read the whole article, all the paragraphs of it. The consequence of Article 39 of the CISG is dreadful, because if the buyer does not give a notice in time, he loses all his rights from the secondary claims. He doesn't get anything anymore because the time period expired. All right? So the claim, the beautiful claim which once existed, is gone if you wait for too long. Now, what is too long? On an international basis, courts say roughly 10 days, maybe in some cases 15 days. That is an international standard because we have very differentiated possibilities to communicate worldwide. In some areas of the world, Germany included, it's very easy to go to a computer and send an email. In other parts of the world, you first have to travel for 100 kilometers to find the next mail office or post office where you could email or telegraph or fax or something like that. So 10 days roughly is the idea they're talking about. It can be even more than that when, for example, the examination of the goods take a lot longer time. So if you have, for example, goods in the chemical industry and they have to have these very long production rows, they have to adjust all the machines in there, and that might take longer than 10 times to check and examine is that the good I actually wanted. Once you know it's bad, then as soon as possible, that's the 10 days. A little of a warning. This lesson today again is called Conflict of Laws and International Private Law from a German point of view. For internal cases, national cases inside Germany, where we apply the German Civil Law Code and the German Code of Commerce, it's a lot faster than the 10 days. We say that roughly, again depending on the product, but roughly for a normal product such as whiskey, you check that pretty fast, okay? You have 48 hours, or in a little more precise expression, you have 2 working days to complain about the quality of the good. Otherwise, the same thing in the German law system. They'll be losing all your rights as the buyer, and you have to keep and use what you got. Whether you like it or whether you can use it or not is of no relevance after that. Summing our examination and our expert opinion up, we know that the buyer wants reduction of price from the seller. Article 50 would be the claim. We checked all the prerequisites right now and found out they're fulfilled because he immediately said, oh, that's not enough, I want to pay less for that. The buyer did. We don't have objections against the claim or exceptions such as you waited too long, the time period expired or something like that. So the final conclusion for us is that the buyer does have a claim on the reduction of the price according to Article 50 of the CISG. So that's our today's lesson. I guess that was, again, a lot of information for you, and you might need some time to think about it. Watch it again, read all the articles, and try to understand what the whole system is about. This lesson was recorded during the times of Corona, 2020. So all the best from my side. Please stay healthy. It looks as if times get better now and we almost got over it. Have fun, and I would be happy to see you again at another time to have a look at conflict of laws from a German point of view. All the best. See you then. Wholeheartedly yours, Bernd Banke. Bye bye.